Welcome back to the David Seaton Show. Well, joining me today is Mr. Paul Vallas, former superintendent of CPD, Philadelphia, New Orleans, and you were also in the final runoff against Mayor Brandon Johnson.
That's right, right.
So I wanted to talk to you today about what's going on in Chicago public city schools. Let me start off this way.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to give them a grade, A, B, C, D, F, what grade would you give them?
F.
F. Why?
Chicago has become an apartheid school system. If a child comes from a low-income family and they attend the Chicago public schools, and the overwhelming vast majority of children who go to Chicago public schools come from low-income families, and the overwhelming vast majority of those children are Black and Latino, then you are literally denied any alternative to your failing neighborhood school. And not only are a large number of Chicago public schools failing, but with the exception of the magnet schools, the majority of Chicago public schools are underperforming. The test scores are abysmal, particularly for Black students. And you're really denied no alternatives. You're literally confined to that failing school because the school district, under pressure from the teachers union, is doing three things that are destroying public education quality in Chicago. The first thing they're doing is they're blocking the schools from making any changes at the local level that benefit kids. If any changes at the local level impact their members, their salaries, their compensation, their workload, hold them accountable, the union blocks it. And so if you're on an elected school council at the local school, you have very little say over the budget, over your programs, whether or not you want a longer school day, whether or not you want a longer school year. So they block any changes. The second thing is they are systematically attempting to destroy charters. And charters are public schools. 54,000 students attend charters in Chicago. 98% are Black and Latino. And they're trying to unionize them. They're trying to force them to close. They're imposing mandates that will block their ability to innovate. And of course, number three, there's an all-out assault on magnet schools. They're trying to get rid of the magnet schools, claiming that there's inequities.
If you just look at CPS just in general, to your point, I would give them an F as well. Only 84% of students are graduating on time out of high school within 4 years, and around 63% of students that graduate from high school are ready to go to junior college or a college. That doesn't even take into account that you've got less than about 15% of students that are able to do math and or read at grade level. And even in the schools within CPS where 0 students can read or do math at grade level, you still have them graduating at a rate of 73 to 74%.
Well,
how are you graduating 3/4 of students that 0% of them can read or do math at grade level?
Because the district has returned to social promotion. They want to eliminate any sort of accountability. And the efforts to do that have accelerated since COVID. Because since COVID in 2019, the public school systems across the nation, particularly in big cities like Chicago, just demonstrated how incapable they were in dealing with the crisis, and how employee-centered their strategy was. They cared about their members, but they didn't care about the kids. How else would you explain shutting schools, campuses down for 78 consecutive weeks, long after school? Incidentally, the Catholic schools reopened right after the first COVID summer. And then, of course, the charter schools were blocked from reopening, but nationally charter schools opened fast too. And then, of course, many other school districts, public school districts, opened fast. But Chicago, they actually threatened to strike illegally 3 times to force the schools to continue to remain closed. And incidentally, not only does this have a devastating impact on students and on working families, because only 1 in 6 low-income families can work remotely. So they had to go to work leaving their children home. Not only did that impact working families, but it had a direct impact on the crime pandemic, because there was a 50% increase in school-age youth murdered, and there was something like 8% of students arrested for murder 9% for, 8% of those arrested for murder, 9% of those arrested for shootings, 50% almost of those arrested for carjackings were out of school age youth. So they not only damaged students social, emotionally, they damaged them academically, but there was a huge student, school age youth driven spike in crime that was responsible for the big increase. And it all, I believe, I truly believe this, the Chicago Teachers Union and the present Teachers Union leadership was largely responsible for that.
You mentioned Catholic schools. And so I want to just touch on private schools just from one vantage point. If you listen to CTU, they will tell you that if we want to get the outcomes, if we want to see better outcomes of students, if we want a better deliverable in terms of the actual student, all you have to do is give them some more money.
Right.
That's all it is. It just comes down to more money. Chicago spends approximately $28,000 to $29,000 per capita on their students. But if you go to a Catholic school or a private school in the Chicagoland area, and I know this from having my daughter went to a private Catholic high school, you spend half as much. You spend around $15,000 to $18,000 to send that same kid to a private high school. And when you go to look at Catholic schools, they graduate nearly at 100%. And over 90% of those students who graduate are ready to go to college. So how are we spending twice as much money in CPS and getting it at best 60% of less than 60% of the quality of student who's graduating?
Because we're spending more money and we're not demanding accountability, and we're spending more money on things that don't improve student achievement, that don't narrow the achievement gap. For example, having worked in the largest school districts in 4 different states, and incidentally, I went through a campaign where the teachers union and Johnson blamed me for doing everything but sinking the Lusitania. And I'm surprised they didn't say I was behind the grassy knoll in Dallas when Kennedy was assassinated. The bottom line is, in each of my districts, not only did our enrollment grow and that I never had to close a single school, and that includes Chicago, but academic performance skyrocketed. In Philadelphia, math scores tripled and reading scores doubled over a period of 7-8 years across all demographics. Why was that? Besides strengthening the curriculum and holding teachers, students, and schools accountable for performance, we also did something else. We lengthened the school day. We lengthened the school year. In New Orleans, where the New Orleans School District led the state in academic improvement for 7 straight years, the kids were getting 34% more instruction than was mandated by the state. So we increased the instructional time on task. The objective here was to focus more time helping the students catch up. It's impossible to do in Chicago. Chicago is one of the shortest school days, shortest school years. The teachers are demanding even less time out of the classroom.
Correct.
And you saw these stunning statistics about teacher absenteeism.
Yes.
The number of teachers, 25, 30, no, it was more, it's closer to 40% of the teachers are absent more than 10 days. You know what I mean? Not because they have medical issues and things like that. The bottom line is they don't care about the kids. They only care about the schools. So
to your point,
yeah.
And the most recent budget, the most recent budget that they passed is going to make teachers and CPS, they are going to be the highest paid teachers in the nation. Up until this budget was passed, the highest paid teachers were in California, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. So you've got CPS teachers who are demanding to have the highest average salary in the nation, with the abysmal outcomes and products that they are producing. That kids are graduating from college and they are functionally illiterate. They're not prepared to go to college or do any type of post-secondary type of. They can't go to the job market. They are unprepared. What is the solution? What do you think? What does Paul Vallas say the solution is to doing a 180 on where the trajectory of the CPS is on? Because ultimately, I think that's the larger issue as well, is that CTU and the missions of CTU and CPS are not calibrated. CTU is all about getting the best thing for the teachers. Right. CPS is about getting the best thing for their students, but they're not. So again, their missions are not even caliber.
Yeah, let me tell you the 4 or 5 things that would be game changers. I call them, like the silver bullets. I mean, they're the things that can be transformational. The union wants to claim that schools are underfunded. They're actually spending about $30,000 a kid, and they're going to be spending close to $33,000 with the new contract per student. Only 54% of that money finds its way into the local schools. So you have this massive central office and these centralized programs, and so much money is diverted, and it's not getting to the local schools. Stacey Davis Gates claims, there's not enough librarians. We have class sizes. The Chicago public schools have 1 employee for every 7.5 kids. And that's before the current contract. 1 employee for every 7.5 kids. They have 22,000 non-teaching employees. Non-teaching. And since COVID, they added 9,000 positions, even though schools were closed for 78 weeks. And the biggest increase in positions were like administrative, central office, central administration positions, not teachers. So at the end of the day, it's not a resources issue, it's a resource allocation issue. One needs to be done that's different. And we did a lot of this from 95 to 2001. I mean, despite going through an election where you had to fend off misinformation, I mean, we had a period of unprecedented positive working relationships with the teachers union, negotiated 2 contracts. Gary Chico and I raised teacher salaries in aggregate of 26%. And we had a 40,000 increase in enrollment. We built 78 new school buildings, the majority of them in Black and Latino communities. I mean, we opened many of the magnet schools and put magnet programs in neighborhood schools. So we were having great success. School test scores were dramatically improving. The things that are game changers are the following. First, there's no substitution for high academic standards. We got rid of social promotion. They've restored it.
To your point, there's a practice in place right now in CPS. They're discussing about removing it, where no zero.
Completely.
The lowest grade you can get is a 50. So to your point, if you only have a mastery of 20% of the subject matter on the test, you're automatically going to get a 50, even if you have a 0% subject matter expertise. So if I can just be, if I can be objective and fair on this, the idea of having a student do disastrously on one test and that impacted their ultimate grade, I think there's a way to massage that or to do that without abandoning standards. The larger issue, though, is they're simply trying to do away with testing altogether. I mean, we have a mayor. Incidentally, our education mayor was an elementary school teacher for 4 years in a high school that I built, elementary school that I built, Jenner, before they tore down Cabrini Green. And then he lasted 1 year at Westinghouse, another high school, incidentally, that I paid for. Sure.
So at the end of the day, we have this failed teacher who did not believe in testing. So, in fact, they're demonizing testing. Stacey Davis Gates has claimed that there's a racial bias. There's a white conspiracy to fail Black kids for testing. So they not only don't want tests to count, they don't want to rank schools based on academic performance. That's why they're trying to get rid of the magnet schools, because they offer a contrast. So
they don't want teacher evaluation.
They don't want teacher evaluation.
They don't want the grades of the students to be included in teacher evaluation. How do you evaluate someone's performance other than the product that they deliver? In this case, the efficacy or the mastery, subject matter mastery of the student.
Well, granted, teachers a lot of times are going to be in schools where there are much greater challenges, but you can at least measure progress.
Yes.
I didn't look at cut scores. I looked at progress. I measured progress. And then when we did our teacher evaluations, and our evaluations were really designed to be teacher self-improvement plans. But the bottom line is this. When we raised accountability, when we increased instructional time on task so that the teachers had more time to work with the kids, test scores skyrocketed. Test scores not only improved dramatically, the number of students in the bottom quartile fell below the national level, which was phenomenal. We went from half the kids in the fourth and bottom quartile of academic improvement, academic performance to 23%, which was unprecedented. In other words, we were outperforming the entire nation overall when it came to the lowest performing students. We were making progress. But and in, of course, Philadelphia, with the tripling of the math scores and doubling read scores, and New Orleans leading the state, high standards, accountability for everybody, and more instructional time on task, spending more time keeping the kids engaged, spending more time helping them get caught up. So there's no substitution for that. Secondly, there's no substitution for radically decentralizing the central office and pushing the money down to the local schools, and then giving the school principals and their locally elected school council the ability to kind of set priorities, to determine their own budgets. When you're only getting 54% of that $30,000, you're spending a lot of money and it's not finding its way into instruction. The third thing, which is absolutely critical, is local schools and the elected local school board councils with their principals need to have the ability. The community needs to be empowered to where if they have a failing school, they need to be able to have the capacity to select better school models. In Indianapolis, you have the innovation schools, public schools where the community says, our school's failing, we want a better model. In Camden, which has been transformed, you've got the innovation schools or the Renaissance schools. Same thing in Denver. In other words, you empower the community to decide what to do with their building, who to partner with, whether or not to have a longer school day, longer school year, whether or not to bring in a better school model. And then I think the fourth thing you have to do is give parents choice. If parents don't like the school that they're sending their kids to, the school in their neighborhood, they should have the right. They should have the right to enroll their kid in a charter school. There should be more magnet programs for kids. They should have the right to send their kids to parochial and private schools. I'm talking about low-income families. They need to have the right, because right now, the teachers union leadership, they either send their kids to private schools or they send their kids to select enrollment magnet schools,
Sure.
incidentally, which they want to get rid of. So, I mean, once their kids are educated, they don't care if they'll get rid of it
Sure.
for anyone else.
Sure.
I mean, there were two studies that came out, and I don't know which one is more accurate, but between 30 to 40% of the Chicago teachers themselves send their kids to private schools. Send their kids to private schools. If our schools are so great, why are you sending your kids to private schools? And I'll submit to you that a large number of the other teachers who have children probably got their kids in magnet schools. Sure. I mean, like some of the union leaders, the mayor, they're not sending their kids, Stacey Davis Gates, they're not sending their kids to their neighborhood schools. They're getting their kids into magnet schools.
That's the one place where I feel conflicted. If I was working, and this is a bad example, mm-hmm. but if I was working at an asbestos plant, I would work. I'm working there and I'm selling asbestos. When I get home, I don't want asbestos in my house because I know how dangerous it is, even though I'm selling it every day. So I make a distinction between Stacey Davis Gates or whomever to say, hey, I'm going to fight for the rights of my students to get an education at my job, but my kids, they can perform better, so I'm going to put them on a different track. Look, I don't begrudge them that, but what I will say is, and I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this, and I think this is something that we need to do as Americans regarding education. Education needs to transform into something that identifies what areas of where people have their natural aptitudes. Mm-hmm. And push them in that. Mm-hmm. If you're naturally good with working with your hands, you probably don't need to take a coding class. If you're really, really good at science, you probably don't need as much history. I think we have this. Our present school system is trying to put kids into this funnel where we're trying to create this one type of student rather than finding what kids are good at, what they have a natural aptitude towards. And if we revamped our school system into that, it would impact all students. Kids would love to go to school because they'd be naturally studying what they naturally love to do.
Yeah, look, let me respond to that, but let me just close my comments on school choice. You should send your kid to the best school, and I do not begrudge any elected official or any teacher or union representative that is seeking the best school for their children. But what they're doing in the process is the hypocrisy of systematically denying poor families, overwhelmingly Black and Latino families, the same right, the same opportunities. That's the hypocrisy.
But the person that we're talking, let's use Stacey Davis Gates, mm-hmm. of whom I am not a fan, by the way. Mm-hmm. But if she is sending her kid to a private school, she's paying for it. So there are some consequences.
But she can afford it.
Because she can afford it.
She can afford it because of her salary and all the things.
If you're a poor person, if you're a poor parent, there are going to be some limitations on what you can provide for your children. There's going to be some ceilings that are just socioeconomic. So I don't know that I necessarily call it hypocrisy as much as Should she be fighting for every kid to get the same education she can afford to get her kid?
Well, what's happened is they've created a system where you only have choice if you live in the right neighborhood.
Sure.
And you only have choice if you have the income. So for all their talk about equity, don't you think you would want to level the playing field by providing families? I mean, the modest scholarship program, which incidentally costs the school district nothing, absolutely nothing, and of which consume 0.6% of what the state spends on public education, provided scholarships to 15,000 overwhelmingly low-income families so that they can send their kids to broker in private school. What in the hell was wrong with that?
But here's the issue with equity, and I'd love to hear your comment on this. The issue with equity is that natural aptitude is not distributed equitably. Everyone is not going to be good. The majority of people will never take calculus.
Yeah.
The majority of people will never,
like me.
Right. The majority of people will never get a PhD.
Me.
The majority of people are, that's why I go back to the aptitude thing, is that if you want education to be equitable, I believe that the better rubric that we should use is to identify where children have their natural aptitude,
no doubt,
push them to be the best at that. Because again, to say that every school should have a calculus teacher doesn't make sense if none of the students in the particular school are at the place where they can take calculus.
But the point that I'm trying to make is when community empowerment means the community and their local elected representatives can say, we're going to look for a better model that suits the needs of students who live in our community. That even means if you want an Afrocentric curriculum, you adopt an Afrocentric curriculum. You know what I mean? Which is what we did. I mean, we sponsored the Betty Shabazz charter school, if you remember, back in '95 when we were opening our charter schools. Our charter schools, many schools had Afrocentric or Latino-centric curriculums at the end of the day. But you empower the community to have input on selecting a better school model, and you don't let the union contract block that. And then secondly is, I just believe that poor families should not be confined to failing schools and should have the opportunities that affluent families have. And unfortunately, that's being denied. And what you have really is a system here that discriminates against low-income families, overwhelmingly Black and Latino. It's an apartheid school system. But to answer your earlier question or respond to your point about how schools need to be flexible and accommodating, I've always felt that high schools, because look, and this predated me because, during the campaign, they kind of blamed me for everything. You know what I mean? But I've never had to close a single school while I was responsible for closing schools.
Exactly.
In fact, I built 78 school buildings. And let me point out that 55% of the contract work went to Black and Latino businesses, and 58% of the salaries paid in constructing those schools went to Black and Latino workers, $1.7 billion. They never talked about that during the campaign. But the point that I wanted to make is I felt that high schools, many years ago, they got rid of vocational ed. The focus was on college, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, so what they were doing was they were telling kids college, not teaching them a skill, not giving them the option to become occupationally trained. My brother went to Washburn Trade School, which of course they shut down. He did not have the patience to sit through classes. He just retired a senior engineer for British Petroleum. I mean, with no college at all whatsoever. I mean, so those were all denied for these young kids. And here they push college while at the same time abandoning standards. So they graduated, socially promoted a whole generation of kids to college. They were giving college loans to go to college. And now the vast majority of those individuals who have got those loans and were socially promoted into college did not complete college, and they're stuck with these loan shark college loans that they're still paying off.
Yes.
And the minority community has been disproportionately impacted. Women have been disproportionately impacted by that. So it's like a racket. So high schools need to be transformed. What I would have done, and I've written op-eds about this, is I would have transformed high schools by integrating into the curriculum what I call work-study opportunities. In other words, opportunities for students, instead of taking irrelevant electives or these irrelevant courses, to have an opportunity to basically get introduced into the workforce, be financial literacy, to be exposed to working men and women, to have an opportunity to pick an area of interest and then to participate in multi-year internships, whether it's police, fire, EMT, EMS, whether it's the trades, whether it's health careers, whether it's getting an internship for at a law firm, an accounting firm,
Sure.
or at a local bank. The whole idea was to allow these kids, while they're going to high school, while they're being they're mastering the core subjects, and also learning financial literacy. They also have an opportunity to participate in a multi-year internship that would culminate in a paid internship, so that they're being introduced into the workforce. Crystal Ray is it was a high school founded by the Jesuits. First Crystal Ray School was in Chicago. Phenomenally successful school. There are now 35 nationwide. The kids go to school and they work while they're going to school, and they get paid while they're going to school. It's overwhelmingly minority. They have a 98, 99% graduation rate. Most of the kids go to college, by the way. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, but you could do that. You could do that in a school system like Chicago and immediately put kids in an environment where, number one, they would select an occupation, so they would be a part of something. And kids are always looking for something to be a part of. Maybe it's doing internships with the police department or fire department or EMS. Maybe it's doing internships with the trades. The second thing it would do would be to put kids in an environment where they're surrounded by the best role models in the community, working men and women.
Sure.
And then the third thing they would do is they would have an opportunity to participate in paid internships, putting money in their pocket. And you want to keep kids off the street, you want to keep the kids engaged, give them a job, give them a paid internship that is part of their high school education. If you did that, that would be transformational. But you're never going to be able to do that, because I'll tell you why. Number one, the unions are not going to want to get rid of these irrelevant electives, these irrelevant electives that could easily be replaced by clubs.
Absolutely.
Number two, they're never going to want these students to participate in work-study internships where the training was done by an individual who was not a member of the Chicago Teachers Union.
Sure.
Okay. And number three, they're never going to want any of the school budget to be a significant portion to be diverted to pay for programs that did not involve Chicago Teacher Union employees. So at the end of the day, they will block that. They will block that transformation. And you could do that. You could do you could get every city department mandate that every city department provide internships for kids. Anybody getting a contract with the city will be required to provide internships. You could incentivize businesses to provide internships for the kids. You could create tens of thousands of year-round internships to keep tens of thousands of kids engaged. And it's not a revenue issue, it's a priority issue.
Sure.
But it's never going to happen with the Chicago Teachers Union leadership.
And you know what's so interesting about everything you just said is that everything you just said was creating something that's student-centric.
Exactly.
CTU couldn't care less about the students, because everything that they fight for is to get better paid, less accountability, and less workload for the teachers. And we know that does not lead to better student outcomes.
Look, I'll tell you a story going back to, and we're talking 1967. That you know how old I am. I like to joke that my dad had the best work-study model. Before we eventually got into the restaurant business when we were older. But my dad was an accountant at the time, and he would always get his sons, me and my two brothers, jobs with his clients. So I was in work study in 8th grade at 72nd and State Street. I worked at a florist, now, and I worked there almost every day. And so after school, I was in a safe place. Number one. Number two, I was surrounded by working men and women. I was surrounded by adults constantly. And number three, I get paid $30 a week. And back in 1967, $30 a week is like $200 today.
Sure.
So I got out of trouble. Now, did I like what I was doing? No, but I was exposed. I was learning how to work. I was learning how to interact. I was watching working men and women, and I had money to go to the ballpark and go to the show or get or go get a shake, which in those days only cost a quarter at People's Store,
Right.
at Gately's People's Store. So in Roseland. So in other words, I mean, so there's no reason why we can't do that. It's not that complicated, but it's never going to happen because the Chicago Teachers Union, under this present leadership, will not allow that to happen. These schools have become political recruitment centers. Unions like the Chicago Teachers Unions are now political parties. You might as well call them the Socialist Party of Chicago. I mean, they're concerned about international issues, about Gaza. They've been the biggest demonizers of police, have been the Chicago Teachers Union, demonizing the police.
There's a mandate in their budget to have a green initiative.
Yeah, a green initiative, or to have housing, or they've been, the schools themselves have spent, Wirepoint's did analysis, anywhere from $200 to $400 million has been spent because of the influx of migrant students. And look, we ran the schools. Gary Chico and I were the school leaders when we had the Bosnian, war in Bosnia.
Right.
We had migrants coming in. In Philadelphia, we housed Haitians.
Okay.
In Philadelphia, after the earthquake, I later went and I did relief work in Haiti. So the bottom line is, we've been welcoming school districts, but they clearly look. They're part of the sanctuary city migrant movement because they have lost so many students. Have left the Chicago public schools, particularly black families taking their students out. The biggest exodus of people, of residents from Chicago, has been black middle income families with children. So they're trying to get those numbers back up because they've lost so many, and they see the Sanctuary City initiative as an opportunity to get the population back so that they don't lose their funding. That's been their shtick.
Paul Vallas, I appreciate this conversation, my friend.
Thank you.
And we'll have to do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.